last two cards. Judgment. So in Judgment, we return to another elemental opposition of ill-dignified, what are traditionally called ill-dignified elements. I think I talked about in the Elemental Dignities video, I talked about how I don't really see elemental dignities in the same way as being dignified or ill-dignified. I think they can all cooperate, or they can all be detrimental to each other, just depending on the proportions in the relationship. But anyway, we're back to a dignity that is traditionally seen as oppositional, air and earth. Except this time, instead of air being above earth, air is also below earth. So we have kind of everyday consciousness going through being and merging and crossing over and then extending and broadening out into kind of more universal consciousness, kind of a consciousness that's not so individuated. We return a little bit to the Fool idea of innocence, but we have to go through a kind of a transformation at a being level, at an earth level, at the foundation of ourselves. There has to be a transition before that Fool-like consciousness can fully expand outward. And so in terms of traditional symbology, it's kind of like the coffins and rising up and the sun. There is an X kind of shape in the traditional depiction, and there is a crossing, and there's also the idea of crossing over, not necessarily crossing over of the soul from death to the afterlife, although that's kind of the religious association with the card. But it's also crossing over from our kind of everyday mundane consciousness to a more expanded consciousness, and crossing that threshold, that X idea of crossing over between one level of consciousness, one state of mind, and another. Another concept within Judgment that I quite like a lot is the idea of calling, and so finding purpose, finding your calling. And so we can be really smart, we can be really intelligent, we can be really well established in our conscious life, our mental realm. It can be very mature, but if we don't have somewhere to channel that intellect, that mind stuff, that consciousness, it can get a bit lost, and people look for, well, what's my calling? What's my purpose? What's the best use of this set of skills, or this intelligence, or this interest, or whatever it is we have? And there is a certain moment of clarity. Again, we have the Vesica Pisces and this I idea in the middle, that has balance on either side, that shows us and goes, okay, there is that moment of clarity when we decide, or maybe not decide, but we see, this is the direction I should take. So the roads are yoking, and then there's a possibility for the roads also to open up. It doesn't necessarily mean that the road has to go in one direction. Just because there's a purpose, it doesn't need to have to necessarily go in one direction, but that purpose is more conscious, is more willful, more purposeful. It has purpose. That's the meaning of the word, purposeful. So it's a little bit different from the Chariot. It's many similar ideas as the Chariot, but it's a little bit of a different nuance, because the Chariot, of course, was also earth and air. And finally, we have the universe in the majors. completion, real completion, and total integration of all the elements. All the elements are integrated together. They're circulating around each other. They're complete. They're individuated. All of the elements are still around the circle anyway, around the universe. All of the elements are still clear in their individual expression. They're radiating outward from that manifestation idea. So they're no longer really mixed and undifferentiated. They're absolutely differentiated, and the multiplicity goes on and on and on, and they merge. That fire and water merge to earth, and earth and air merge to fire, and on and on and on. And it could actually spread outward and outward and outward and outward, in a kind of a prismatic, crystalline, never-ending kind of shattering of shards, that each shard is a complete representation of the whole idea. So we get things like the net of Indra imagery, where each aspect reflects the whole. Each eye on each jewel on the net of Indra is a reflection of the entire net itself. What else? The idea of holograms, where a hologram is a small representation of the entire thing. So this is also a slightly different expression, visual expression, of that thing I talked about way back with manifestation, where sometimes the mystics talk about the enlightenment process as the universe exploding within us. So there's a completion to the universe card, and a wholeness, and a feeling of this cycle. It's also an ending of a cycle in a way, but it's not the end of a cycle in the same way that death was, where it was like, okay, this is an ending, this is where something has to stop for something new to begin. This is the continuation of all cycles integrated together, and they're all coexisting, and every cycle kind of intermingles and mixes, but they're all also kind of doing their own thing every cycle. So this is also where, I forget which card, but where I talked about sometimes we get kind of caught up in our own, what's going on in our own lives, and nothing else in the world matters. The universe card is kind of about all of the cycles of things happening. So my life and my friend's life and my enemy's life, they're all universes that are happening all at once. And again, a kind of a recognition of that, but not necessarily integrated together, because what I'm doing and what someone on the other side of the world are doing, or on the other side of the universe are doing, they may be intermixed, they may interact, but they may not either. And that's perfectly natural too. What happens on one side of the earth may not affect me, but it's nonetheless happening. There is that other cycle happening. So it's a coexistence of many cycles together. And so maybe it's a start of a recognition of how those cycles are both individual and intermingled. And sometimes actually, in that sense, the card is also about kind of minding your own business. There's also a common discussion had amongst tarot readers and probably other types of people who do divination and investigative work in that way. Probably even also psychotherapists and more kind of earthy scientific modalities, what are considered earthy and scientific anyway, that people will come asking, well, what's going on for that person, or what's going on for this person, and ask about people around them, and kind of ask a tarot reader to pry into another person's life. And on the one hand, if it's a person that person interacts with, it is actually that person's business because their spheres overlap. But what's not that person's business is where the sphere doesn't overlap. And so sometimes the universe card can represent that relationship and understanding that relationship where what's my business about you is how your sphere overlaps and intersects with mine. That's both of our business. But what's not my business is how your sphere is the parts of your sphere that don't intersect with mine. If you want to share those things with me, that's great. But if not, it's not my business. It's not my concern. And we kind of have lost a little bit of that in this age of the internet, where everybody's business is everybody else's business all the time, right? What I had for dinner, not what I had for dinner, but what people had for dinner is everybody's business. And it's interesting. There's nothing wrong with it being that way. But the boundaries are less clear. And to some extent, again, it's like a neither good or bad thing. To some extent, that's really cool. Like, it's really cool to break down those boundaries and to not have such limitations on this is mine and this is yours and this is private and this is public. It's nice to have that more open and go, oh hey, we all like this weird food thing, or we all like this beautiful arrangement of how food is. Food is a big thing. I know Instagram it's like huge with food, and that's great. And when everything that we're doing at every moment is shared, and very few things are still private. And I think, and there are enough things that are still private, that's no problem. But I think that blurring of those lines confuses us and makes it seem as though everything should always be our business. And that's not the case. There should be kind of a demarcation between where my sphere is not interacting with your sphere is my business. They overlap. And so that's the universe. That's where they're overlapping, but there's a point where even where this sphere and this sphere do not even come into contact with each other, and they overlap this middle one, but only so much. And so what's inside this middle one, it's its own business. It's fine, right? So they're a slightly different idea of the universe in that sense. But there's also the traditional senses of completeness and prosperity too. Kind of everything being there and everything being available. Of feeling whole, of being complete, and of feeling in that same interconnected way, of feeling unified with everybody else. Because kind of the great thing about that breaking down of boundaries is seeing our commonality, our unity with each other, and how everybody eats and everybody gets angry at times or another, and everybody desires nice things, and everybody kind of has fights with their neighbors, and everybody falls in love, and everybody has jealousy, and all of those things of the human existence, in that sense of breaking down the boundaries and not keeping those things private, whether it's social media or other reasons why those boundaries are broken down, it gives us a sense of wholeness. It gives us a sense of interconnectivity and recognition that we're not just individuals. We're interconnected beings. So on that, that's going to be the Major Arcana.